Shabbat Shalom, everybody. So today is Torah portion Tzav, and it's a military term meaning to command. So you're not going to ask your troops, could you please go over there and guard that front over there? No, you're going to command them to guard that front, and their job is to guard that. That's their job. And so this command is also what God is telling Moses to tell his people. It's a commandment. It's not a suggestion. So in order to get started, we're going to have to get a little bit of some words, some buzzwords here, and understand some of their meanings, because there's a lot more to it than I've been taught. And so we see here we got the word sin. That is the word chata in Hebrew and harmatia in the Greek. And they both mean to miss the mark, as if you're trying to hit the target, right? Well, I'll show you a demonstration of that. The second one is transgression. In the Hebrew is pesha. And it means to break an agreement. An agreement with your neighbor, agreement with God. And so if you had an agreement with God and you break that, that's a transgression. So that's an intentional sin. That's something you intentionally did. And then there's the word avan, which is iniquity, and that's malicious intent. Rape, murder, that kind of area. So these three forms of sin, in Daniel, when he says in Daniel 9, he says 70 weeks are determined for your people to put away sin, to put away transgression, and to atone for iniquity. Daniel 9, when those 70 weeks are done, these three things will be involved, right? And it's also, these three sins are in Isaiah 53, right? So we can see these connections, and we can see that, and we'll see that there's some problems with fixing these, that maybe it's going to have to be supernaturally done. So here's the word for chata, or the Greek himatara, and it says that in the Hebrew word, often translated as sin, is chata, which means missing the mark, or missing the goal. It signifies a failure to fulfill a goal, deviation from the right path, or an error. To speak to and this will be all throughout Leviticus. He'll say, speak to the people of Israel, and saying, if anyone unintentionally sins, right? So, as we'll see, these, like 98% of the sacrifices were for unintentional sin, right? And that's because you accidentally missed the mark. If you got a target and you're shooting it, your intention is to hit that mark, right? Sometimes we miss. Unintentionally. We didn't mean to. Our genuinely goal is to shoot and hit that target, right? And stay on track. In the Old Testament, pesha translates to transgression or rebellion, signifying a willful violation of God's law or breach of trust, often implying a defiance and going beyond the limits that is permissible, God's standards. And we see in John, he says, for the transgression of the law is sin, John says, right? So John's still agreeing with the Old Testament version is. Now, David's sin with Bathsheba, where he not only sinned but also tried to cover it up, and Bathsheba's husband was killed as an example of iniquity. So this was an intentional sin by David. And there was no sacrifice. David knows of it. He writes his apology and pours out his heart in Psalms 51, right? And understands, sacrifices you don't want. You want a broken, contrite heart. That's the only thing that's going to fix what I've done, right? Micah 2 says, "Woe to those who plan iniquity, to those who plot evil on their beds, and in the morning, in the light, they carry it out because it is in their power to do so." So intentional, planned out. Psalms 51 is where David says, "Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin." So when David finds out that, and he intentionally did it, there's no doubt about it, but Nathan has to come and tell him a little story, and then David gets it. And he goes, and Nathan says, "You're that man." Right after David said, "That man needs to die." Right? Okay, Nathan says, "You're the guy." But, and so immediately David just goes, "I've sinned in the face of God." He recognizes his sin, confesses, and Nathan says, "God's forgiven you, but there's still consequences to pay." Isaiah 27. So I want to talk a little bit about atonement. "Therefore," he says, "by this iniquity of Jacob will be atoned for." Isaiah 27. He says, so your iniquity, which is the intentional, malicious sin of Jacob, will be atoned for. And this will be the full fruit of the removal of sin, when he makes all the stones of the altar like chalk stones, crushed to pieces. No asherim or incense altars will remain standing. God's telling Jacob that he can atone for his sin by smashing the altars into chalk and knocking down the asherim. That was the wooden poles for the goddess Astarte, or the incense altars that remain standing. You go in and totally remove all of that, and I'll remove your sin. I'll atone for your sin. Now, there's no sacrifice involved, right, for an atonement. And this is atoning for the iniquity of your sin. So we have to get an understanding of what God says atonement is. I got a couple more here. Isaiah 22. "And the Lord of hosts has revealed himself in my ears. Surely this iniquity will not be atoned for until you die." So the wages of sin is death. And if you die, then you've atoned it, or you can't sin anymore, right? The law's not after you. So, in this instance, the iniquity will not be atoned for until you die. No mention of sacrifice. Exodus 30. "And the rich shall not give more, and the poor shall not give less than a half shekel. And when they give an offering unto the Lord to make an atonement for your nephesh." So this is the when they were supposed to give a half a shekel according to the temple, right? And it really was a kind of a census, right? They wanted the rich or the poor. This wasn't about how much you give. This was, hey, this represents my portion, right? But God says it's an atonement for your nephesh, for your souls, a shekel coin. So, I thought atonement was, killing an animal and then that animal pays for your sin and he takes your place. No, it's bigger than that. C.S. Lewis did not endorse any specific atonement theory. As we can see, it's kind of hard to pinpoint an atonement theory to, because there's so many things. I mean, the temple had to be atoned for, the altar had to be atoned for, the land has to be atoned for. Well, they didn't sin. What does atonement really mean? And so in his book, Mere Christianity, in the chapter of the repentant sinner, he talks about his struggle with atonement theory. And if you go look up the word atonement, you'll find out today it's still a theory. And here are the 7 theories: the moral influence theory, the ransom theory, Christus Victor, the satisfaction theory, the penal substitutory theory. That's where God takes your sin and pays the penalty of it. That's a theory. The government theory and the scapegoat theory. Those are all theories that the vast majority of theologians have tried to grasp this understanding of atonement. Right? Andrew Rillera wrote a book called The Lamb of the Free. And he goes through and talks about the sacrificial system and his conclusion, and I hope to bring that to you guys someday as I go through that book, but his conclusion is that, like the Day of Atonement, right? He calls that the Day of Decontamination, right? The Decontamination Day is the Day of Atonement, because we can see all this stuff is for atonement for ritual purity, right? All these sacrifices that we talk about were to ritually purify you for sacred space. And so, God atones for you, ask forgiveness, he's just to forgive, right? But tomorrow, I'll be back to being contaminated again, right? Oops, had leavened bread, back to the drawing board. Okay, then another term here in these things is the word korban. And as you can see, it's used for sacrifice. It's used for the word offering. And so, but the word comes from the root word karav, which means to draw near. So when we go through these Leviticus sacrifices, he says, and when you bring an offering, korban, something that draws near to God, right? So the purpose of the korban is to draw near to God, right? And so the idea is that you become contaminated. Like Mary, when she had Jesus, right? She had to offer a sin offering, right? Because she had a child. Did she sin by having a child? No. She was ritually impure from having the child. Like Nelson talked about last week, that God has sacred space, and that you have to. So when you offer an animal's life, right? It's not the death of the animal that atones for your sin, because he says in Leviticus 17, he says, "Do not eat the blood, for it is the life that's in the blood that atones for your sin." So you're not killing an animal to pay for a death penalty. You're killing the animal because the blood represents life, and that can enter into the sacred space, a realm that represents life. God does not want death to enter into that realm of life, right? In Matthew Thiessen's book called Jesus and the Forces of Death, right? And it's a book that goes through about impurity. And you think about the story about the woman that was hemorrhaging for 12 years, and she knew that all she had to do was just reach out and grab that tassel of Jesus, that she would be healed. And she does. And Jesus goes, who's touched me? There's thousands of people, bumping into each other. But he knew something had happened at that moment. And she gets healed. And so the purpose that he says in his book, he says that the woman was not asking Jesus to do away with the ritual purity law, right? Because that's how God keeps sacred what's sacred. Don't be bringing in the realm of the death into the sacred, into the realm of the life. You get cleansed you ritually get pure, right? Then you may enter into sacred space. So she wasn't asking God to do away with the ritual impurity law. She was asking him to overcome it, right? Just like when he reaches out and touches the leper. The leper goes, if you will, would you cleanse me? He doesn't say forgive me. He says, will you cleanse me? And Jesus says, I will. And he touches a leper. This is the holy touching the unclean, right? And the man's healed, right? Anybody else touched him, that person would become unclean, and outside the camp you go. So Jesus is showing that he himself is holy. Like in Isaiah 6, when it says, I've seen the Lord, and his throne fills the temple. And Isaiah says, oh, I'm a man of unclean lips. And the angel, and it says, and then an angel reached down and grabs a live coal from the altar, right? This is in the throne in heaven. So there's a throne, there's a God on the heaven, there's an angel that's taking a live coal from a live fire that's in this picture of a tabernacle. And he touches the lips of Isaiah, and he says, your sin has been atoned for. No sacrifice required. But it's the holy now touching the unholy, right? So we can't do that ourselves. We need the holy. And so we should protect the holy, which is the sacred space of God. Like if Mary, when she has a baby, she's now ritually impure. She didn't sin. She just needs to offer the 2 turtle doves and wait the required time. Now, if she would have entered into sacred space, into the tabernacle area, ritually defined, then she would have sinned. But she wasn't a sinner before that. She just needed to do ritual purification, right? Which is, the sacrifice of 2 turtle doves or whatever was required by Moses, right? So how does this death of an animal ritually pure us? It's got to be by faith. God says it. We have to believe it. These are God's instructions and aren't our instructions. So we'll start here in Leviticus 6. No, let's go back to Leviticus 1, right? The very beginning of Vayikra. And God's telling Moses, now speak, and if any man that wants to offer, to give an offering, a korban, something to draw near, right? That word is Adam, which means mankind. This is open, this sacrificial system that allows you to draw near to God, that fixes your ritual impurity, is for Adam, for mankind, right? So jump to Leviticus 6, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, if a person sins and commits a trespass against the Lord by lying to his neighbor about what was delivered to him for safekeeping, or about a pledge, or about a robbery, or if he has extorted from his neighbor, or he has found that it was lost and lies concerning it, and swears falsely in the one that these things that the man may do in which he sins, and it shall be because he has sinned and is guilty, and he shall restore what was stolen, or in the thing that was extorted, or that was delivered to him for safekeeping, or that which was lost which he found. So he says, if a person sins and does a trespass against God, against Yah, by lying to his neighbor. So you lie to your neighbor, you've just trespassed. He says, God says you're trespassing me. Because what are his laws? Love the Lord, love your neighbor. And you're violating something that should be between you and God. So it's not just a sin against your neighbor, it's a sin against your God. Okay, verse 5. So all about that which was sworn falsely, he shall restore its full value. So, somebody loses a 20 and you pick it up and the guy goes, anybody see a 20 here? And you say, I didn't see any 20. You're that man, right? You and David go stand in the corner. And he shall restore its full value and 1/5. So not only does he have to pay the $20 back, if he wants to fix it, he's got to pay another $5, another fifth of that. And he shall bring the trespass offering, and he shall bring his trespass offering to the Lord, a ram without blemish, without the flock, your valuation as a trespass offering to the priest. So the priest shall make atonement for him before the Lord, and he shall be forgiven any one of these things that he may have done in trespass. So you still have to give back the money. You have to give back 1/5, and you have to pay for an animal. So it's a very costly transgression. Leviticus 6, this is the laws about the burnt offering, right? So burnt offering, if you'll remember, when God tells Abraham to take his son, his only son, to a mountain he'll show him and offer him as a burnt offering, right? So Isaac, being a shadow of Yeshua, as a sacrifice, that shadow type was a burnt offering. And a burnt offering was a free will offering. It was something that you gave from your heart, It's like when God says, hey, I'm taking up an offering so we can build a tabernacle so I can live amongst you. These are the things I did, and people just flooded the pile of donations that he had to say that's enough, right? That was a free will offering, something that comes from the heart. And the same thing with this burnt offering. So this was something that came from Abraham's part that he was freely willing to do, freely willing to give up, something that was very valuable to him. And so in verse 8, then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, command Aaron and his sons, saying, this is the law of the burnt offering. Now the burnt offering also was the morning and the evening. That was the Tamid offering that Dave was talking about. And like Nelson's talked about before, it was the morning and the evening sacrifice, right? And connecting that to Jesus, Yeshua, as was up on the cross in the morning and was the sacrifice all day. He was the evening and the morning sacrifice. So you can see all these connections to the burnt offering. He says, and the burnt offering shall be on the hearth on the altar all night and all morning. And the fire of the altar shall keep burning on it, and the priest shall put on his linen garment and his linen trousers, and he shall put on his body and take up the ashes of the burnt offering, which the fire has consumed on the altar, and he shall put it beside the altar. Then he shall take off his garments. This is quite the procedure, right? And he will put on the garments and carry the ashes outside the camp to a clean place. And that the fire of the altar shall keep burning on it, and it shall not be put out. And the priest shall burn wood on it every morning, and lay the burnt offering in it, and he shall burn on the fat of the peace offerings, and the fire shall always be burning on the altar, and it shall never go out. So we see all these details, right? And I believe that God does not write fluff, and he does not write filler. Now, we might not understand everything here, but there's, as we all probably got to know, that there's many layers to this word that God has, right? And this is not just filler. Even though we don't understand, and sometimes like in the Torah portion, Teruma, detail after detail after detail after detail about the building of this tabernacle that God's going to live in, but it's only a temporary tabernacle, right? But there's reason he was given all that detail, and it was because he was telling you about a tabernacle that was already in heaven. This is the one that I showed Moses. And all this detail is in that tabernacle, a fully functional tabernacle. So, we have to take time and understand these things that God's trying to show us about all this detail. So we know Jesus was that Isaac was supposed to be a burnt offering, right? And then John 10, Jesus says, "For this reason the Father loves me, because I laid down my life," free will, "that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down on all of my accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have the authority to take it up." Jesus was freely willing. He was a free will offering. And when they would throw that animal up on the rack and burn it completely, nobody gets atoned for, nobody gets a T-bone. It's a life totally dedicated to God, which is what it's trying to represent Isaac as a foreshadow of Jesus, a life totally dedicated to God, right? And then in Romans 12, right, Paul says, let us be a living sacrifice, right? Holy and acceptable. A free will offering, right? So free burnt offerings can still be done today in that context. It was just a life totally dedicated to God. The grain offering, verse 14. "This is the law of the grain offering, that the sons of Aaron shall offer it on the altar before the Lord. He shall take from it a handful of fine flour." Now, does anybody ever grind kernels of wheat into fine flour? I've seen them do it, but I'm thinking this is going to be a lot of work. I mean, you're just grinding that thing, right? You probably grind for 6 hours to make a bread. Anyways, fine flour of grain, offering with its oil, and the frankincense which is on the grain offering, and shall burn it on the altar for a sweet aroma, as a memorial to the Lord. This bread offering was a memorial to the Lord, right? And it's with fine flour and oil and frankincense. And so, we can see that frankincense was connected to bread, at least in the story of Bethlehem, right? Jesus was born in Bethlehem. When the three or the Magi finally catch up to him, one of the gifts was frankincense for the child that was born in Bethlehem, right? Bethlehem. But he's saying here that this bread is a memorial. A memorial. It could be a memorial because you recognizing who gave you the bread, right? Jesus. Then he took up the cup and gave thanks and said, "Take this and divide it amongst yourselves, for I say to you, I will not drink of this fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes." And then he took the bread and gave thanks to it and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body, which is given to you to do in this remembrance," or memorial of me. Is he being the grain offering at this moment? And if you think about the oil, the bread, it says to put oil on it. This bread now is anointed. Jesus is the bread of heaven that was anointed. Verse 16, "And the remainder of it, Aaron and his sons shall eat. unleavened bread, and it shall be eaten in a holy place in the court of the tabernacle, meaning that they shall eat it. It shall not be baked with leaven. I have given it as a sin offering and trespass offering. All the males among the children of Israel may eat it, and it shall be a statute forever in your generations concerning the offerings which was made by fire to the Lord. Everyone who touches them must be holy. So if you're going to eat this holy bread, this set-apart bread, then you have to be set apart already in advance, and then you have to eat it within this set-apart place called the court of the tabernacle. So this is like a very sterile place, and nothing is to be contaminated, because you'll either contaminate the bread or the bread's going to contaminate you. And then you're defiled. And then not only are you defiled, then you've defiled sacred space, right? You defiled God's space. And we see that too, not only in Revelation. It says that nothing unclean or that does abomination will enter into the tabernacle, the New Jerusalem, right? He's still protecting sacred space in that time. Verse 19, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, this is the offering that Aaron and his son, which they shall offer to the Lord, beginning in the day when he is anointed. 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour in daily grain offering, half of it in the morning, half of it at night. Those morning burnt offering sacrifices. And it shall be made in a pan with oil. So he says, on the beginning of the day when he is anointed, this is when the priest is anointed, he's going to make this bread, and he's going to put oil on it. He's going to anoint this bread that's holy, set apart. And when it is mixed, and you shall bring it, and the baked pieces of the grain offering you shall offer for a sweet aroma to the Lord. And the priest from among the sons who is anointed in this place shall offer it. It is a statute forever to the Lord. It shall be wholly burned. For every grain offering for the priest shall be wholly burned. It shall be eaten. So this particular grain offering is another burnt offering, totally consumed. The law of the sin offering. Also the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to Aaron and his sons. This is the law of the sin offering, the hatiyah, right? In the place where the burnt offering is killed, and the sin offering shall be killed before the Lord, it is most holy. And the priest who offers it to sin shall eat it in the holy place. It shall be eaten in the court of the tabernacle of meeting. And again he says, everyone who touches the sin offering's flesh must be holy. Once that offering has been offered to God, it now makes it set apart, and everybody that touches it has to be set apart. And when the blood is sprinkled on any of the garment, you shall wash on it what was sprinkled in the holy place. But the earthen vessel is which is boiled shall be broken, and it shall be boiled in a bronze pot, and it shall be both scoured and rinsed in water. So we've got tons of detail here. It's not for our entertainment purposes, but, God is, all these details matter. And again, like I said, we may not understand all these details, but as we go through these Torah portions year after year, a little bit shows up, a little bit shows up here or there. And we begin to see this bigger picture of all these details does have meaning. And sometimes you got to go to the Hebrew or the Greek to flesh out these ideas. Verse 29, and the males among the priests may eat it, and most holy, but no sin offering from which any of the blood is brought into the tabernacle, the meaning, to make atonement. The holy place shall be eaten, it shall be burned with fire. So there's sin offerings for the man, the Adam, the mankind, but then they had the sin offering that the priest would do for himself, and the sin offering that he would do for the congregation of Israel on the Day of Atonement. So the further in the sacrifices go, the the reason, then it has to be burnt, has to be consumed, right? The bread, the sin sacrifices. But the other sin sacrifices that doesn't go into the very most holy place can be eaten. In fact, the sin sacrifice was a shared meal, and we'll see that as the Shalom offering, right? It wasn't for atonement for sin. It was a shared meal where you take a portion, you would give it to the priest, and then some would go to God, some would go to the priest's family, some would go to your family, and so you're now sharing a meal, right? And that's the best description of what was happening at Passover, right? Because we know that Passover wasn't a sin offering. There's no mention of sin in the entire Passover thing. It was the redemption of the firstborn and to release them from bondage, right? The law of the trespass offering. Likewise, this is the law of the trespass offering. It is the most holy. In the place where they killed the burnt offering, they shall kill the trespass offering there. So there was a space where the burnt offering was killed, and all these other offerings are killed in that spot. And the blood he shall sprinkle around the altar, and he shall offer it as it's all of its fat, and fat tail, and the fat that covers the entrails, and the 2 kidneys, and the fat that is on them by the flanks, and the fatty lobe attached to the liver above the kidneys he shall remove. And the priest shall burn them on the altar, as it is offering made by fire to the Lord. It is a trespass offering. So we've got some pretty gory details in here, right? You know, as I was talking to my friend Bob earlier, because we were trying to figure out, you know, what is this thing with the fat and the kidney and the liver and all that stuff, right? And so you can see that, you know, like Paul says, you know, with the renewing of your mind, right? And in that sentence is a Greek word that can mean mind, or it can mean kidney, right? So what does a kidney do is it filters it out. And God's saying, let your mind filter out the gateways of your ears and your eyes, and that will be the renewing of your mind as you learn how to filter that out. So, you know, I'm just saying that there's got to be a meaning to it, and we have to dig a little deeper. And I'm sure that one day as we keep digging that these things will surface, if that somebody hasn't already got a better explanation. And so the priest shall burn it on the altar as an offering made by fire to the Lord. It is a trespass offering. Now, a trespass offering is the offering that Isaiah 53 talks about, right? He is our guilt offering, right? So, and this is where we could have sinned against somebody else or sinned against God. So Isaiah 53 is like a fix-all, and it connects to Daniel 9, which connects to the 70 weeks of Daniel, which connects to the for everlasting righteousness. Every male among the priests shall eat it. It shall be eaten in a holy place, and the trespass offering is like the sin offering. There is one law for them both, and the priest who makes atonement with it shall have it. And the priest who offers anyone's burnt offering, that the priest shall have for himself, and the skin of the burnt offering, and he was offered, and every grain offering was baked in the oven, and it was prepared and covered in the pan, and the priest. Now these guys had to do this exactly, right? And we're thinking, you know, why are we reading this today? We don't have it all. We can't kill the animal and put the kidneys up on the rack, and you know. But there's got to be a reason, and I'll give you my idea at the end. And not only this trespass offering, right? So this is the one that's represented in Isaiah 53. And then we get to the law of the peace offering. This is the Shalom. This is the law of the sacrifice of the peace offering, which he shall offer to the Lord. If he offers it for his thanksgiving, then he shall offer it with a sacrifice of thanksgiving. And he shall offer with the sacrifice of thanksgiving unleavened cakes mixed with oil, unleavened wafers, anointed with oil, cakes blended of flour and oil, besides the cakes as his offering. He shall offer the leavened bread and the sacrifices of thanksgiving and the peace offering. And from it shall come offering one cake from another, and the heave offering to the Lord, and it shall belong to the priest who sprinkles the blood of the peace offering. This was the shared meal offering, right? Didn't atone for sin. It's kind of one way that the Leviticus, the Levite priests got paid so they could feed their family, right? You could participate in it, and you could take a section of it, he gets a section of it. Just like on the Passover event, right? They took a whole lamb, and people participated in the lamb. And yet that Passover lamb was an offering to God. It was also not only that, it was a betrothal moment to come into covenant with God. And the flesh of the sacrifice of the peace offering for the thanksgiving shall be eaten the same day it is offered. This is the language of Passover. And he shall not leave it until morning. And if the sacrifice of his offering is a vow or voluntary offering, it shall be eaten the same day that he offers this sacrifice. But on the next day the remainder of it also shall be eaten. The remainder of the flesh of the sacrifice on the third day must be burned with fire. And if any of the flesh or any of the sacrifice of the peace offering, as it is eaten on the third day, it shall not be accepted, nor shall it be imputed to him. It shall be an abomination to him who offers it, and the person who eats it shall bear the guilt. So it's a very serious thing. It's just like the Passover language, you know. Don't leave any of it until morning. Consume it, burn it by fire, whatever you're going to do, right? And so we see that this peace offering, you know, not only was a representative of the Passover, representative of the betrothal moment, representative of the redemption of the firstborn. And so in the book Jesus and the Forces of Death, he writes about how that, you know, we think that, you know, the killing of the animal is the atonement for our sin, right? But we're the ones that take the animal, we present the animal to the priest, and then we're given the knife, we're the ones that cut the throat. So we're the ones that have done all that. The priest just collects the blood, which God says is life, that he may take it into the realm of life, right? And then it says that the priest will then go make atonement. So the killing of the lamb doesn't make atonement. That just starts the process. So he's got to take that into the holy place, and then that makes the atonement, which really is purification offering. You know, it shouldn't even be called a sin offering. It should be called a purification offering. We see in the end of Acts where Paul comes into Jerusalem, they share their stories of what's going on with the Gentiles, and everybody's excited, and James says, hey, but there's some guys here that think you're teaching against us and teaching against the law of Moses, and, you know, you need to go show them that you still walk orderly according to the customs of Moses. And I want you to take these 4 guys down and take them to let them complete their Nazirite vow process, which they would cut their hair and then offer 3 sacrifices: a sin, a burnt offering, and a peace offering, right? And Paul does it, right? You know, and I've mentioned this a few times, and a long time ago when I'm confused about it, I go, what? This is 30 years after the cross. What's Paul doing, right? You get the memo? but when you read it, and you read it slow down a little bit, it says that it was a purification offering, right? Purification to ritually cleanse you so you could be within sacred space. And so 30 years after the cross, so, I'm just saying that we have to, there's a lot more to this story about atonement and sin and purification and, the Day of Atonement. The one author calls it the Day of Decontamination, right? And we know that's a day in the future. The Day of Atonement is still in the future for most of the people that understand it that way, right? And then what's the next step after the Day of Atonement? It's the Feast of Tabernacles, right? You've got to be decontaminated because you're going to go into the tabernacle, which is the one that comes out of the heaven that God says can't be defiled, and no abomination is going to enter into it. You've got to be decontaminated. And the flesh that touches any unclean thing shall not be eaten. It shall be burned with fire, and as for the clean flesh, and who is the clean and the made, but the person who eats the flesh of the sacrifice of the peace offering that belongs to the Lord, while he is unclean, that person shall be cut off from his people. So if you're unclean and you eat the sacrifice offering, you'll be cut off from your people. Sometimes cut off means killed. Sometimes cut off just means exit the camp, exit the country. You're now in exile. Israel knows that term very well. Verse 21, moreover, the person who touches the unclean thing, such a human uncleanness, unclean animal, or any abominable unclean thing, and who eats the flesh of the sacrifice of the peace offering that belongs to the Lord, that person shall be cut off from his people. Verse 22, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel, saying, you shall not eat any fat of the ox or the sheep or the goat, and the fat of the animal that dies naturally, and the fat of that which is torn by wild beasts may be used in another way, but you shall by no means eat it. For whoever eats the fat of the animal, of which the men offer of an offering made by fire to the Lord, the person who eats it shall be cut off from his people. Moreover, you shall not eat of the blood in any of your dwellings, whether it is a bird or a beast, whoever eats all these blood, that this person shall be cut off from this people. Now, we're 2,000 years removed from all this understanding, right? Moses is given these instructions, and then he gives it to the priests, and somehow they begin to understand what was going on here, or they were just being obedient. We don't understand that, but we know God told us to do it, right? Now this is the portion for Aaron and his sons. And then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel, saying, he who offers a sacrifice of peace offering to the Lord, who shall bring offering to the Lord from the sacrifice of the peace offering, his own hand shall bring the offering made by fire to the Lord. The fat with the breast he shall bring, and the breast he shall be waved at the wave offering. And the priest shall burn the fat on the altar, but the breast of the Aaron, and also in the right thigh. So here he's talking about, a right thigh and a right breast, and sharing this animal. And for the breast and the wave offering and the thigh of the heave offering I have taken from the children of Israel, from the sacrifices of their peace offering, and I have been given to Aaron and the priest and to his sons, and from the children of Israel by the statute forever. Now, even though we might not understand exactly what's going on here, and we piece it a little, chisel it by little, but God wrote it, right? And we have to keep continue. If we avoided Leviticus, which a lot of people do, and I see why, right? We'll never chew on this information to try to dig in it a little deeper. What's the Hebrew word for this? What's the connection here? To fully bring out the message that the Most High has given us to guard. He says, keep these things. Guard them, shamar. Okay. This is the consecration portion of Aaron and his sons for the offering made by fire on the day Moses presented them to minister to the Lord as priests. And the Lord commanded this to be given to them by the children of Israel on the day that he appointed, by statute forever throughout their generation. So this Torah portion is called Tzav, right? And if you put a mem in front of that, it's now mitzvah, right? Which is the word for commandment. Mitzvot for commandments, right? And they're saying that this word zvav is a military term meaning to command. And that's why he calls them commandments, not suggestions. This is the law of the burnt offering, the grain offering, and the sin offering, the trespass offering, the consecrations of the sacrifice of the peace offering, which the Lord commanded Moses on Mount Sinai, on the day that he commanded the children of Israel to offer the offerings into the Lord of the wilderness of Sinai. Now, a lot of people say, well, you know, God gave this to the Jews, right? We don't have to be bothered with all of that. But they forget when they left Egypt, it was 12 tribes and a mixed multitude, right? This is what God calls the congregation of Israel. You know, congregation means the like-minded. You know, they witnessed the plagues that happened, and obviously they're going, yeah, we probably should go with those guys, right? We've seen all these plagues. We've seen what this God can do, and we're going to go with them. And now they become the congregation of Israel. And when they went to Mount Sinai, because this is where they're at in Leviticus, they're standing at the base of Mount Sinai, getting all these instructions for a whole year, right? Getting ready for the cloud to lift up and start following the cloud. And that's not just Israel. That's not just Jews. That's just 12 tribes and a mixed multitude that now God has said, you are going to be, all of you are going to be priests of this kingdom. And all the people said, we will do it. So, we've got to understand that this is not for Israel. God's creating a kingdom, and he doesn't want just Jews in it. They were supposed to be the missionaries that went out to to go to the nations and take my light to the nations and take my salvation, Yeshua, to the ends of the earth. That's your job. Be priests. Be example. Be ministers between God and mankind. There's a bigger picture here than just trying to create a kingdom for Jews. This is a kingdom for mankind, for Adam. Leviticus 8. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take Aaron and his sons with him and his garments, and the anointing oil, and a bull, and a sin offering, 2 rams, a basket of unleavened bread, and gather all the congregation together at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. So Moses did as the Lord commanded, and the congregation was gathered together at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. And Moses said to the congregation, like-minded people, this is what the Lord commanded to be done. And then when Moses brought Aaron and his sons and washed them with water, and he put on the tunic on him, and girded him with a sash, cloth, and a robe, and put on the ephod on him, and girded him with the intrinsically woven band of the ephod, and it tied the ephod on him. Then he will put the breastplate on him, and he will put the Urim and the Thummim in the breastplate, and he will put the turban on his head, and upon the turban in its front is the golden plate, the holy crown, as the Lord had commanded. So this was a plate of gold that wrapped around his turban that tied in the back, right? This is what's described in Revelation 4 as these 24 elders are sitting with harmation is the Greek word for the garment that you hang your tzitzits on, and this breastplate of gold that says holy to the Lord. This is where you get that from. We'll look at those. So you can see this apron. That's the ephod. And then in the picture to the right is the breastplate with all the jewels for the 12 tribes of Israel. And then you see the white and the black stone. They don't really know what color they were, but there was probably a difference between the two, and these are called the Urim and Thummim. And so it was used to determine matters that maybe that wasn't described in all the details of the law, you know. It could be representative of a yes or no, right? Go or stay, right? And somehow they would tuck them in behind the breastplate until they were needed. So maybe they, shuffle them around a little bit and go in there and grab one and says, this is the answer. What's that? Right. Yeah. Joseph Smith knew what these guys were, right? He had an Urim and Thummim, right? But he read through these stones and deciphered. We could see here that they were really meant to settle a decision that was probably a yes or no, stay or go, or two choices, and then that would settle it. And here is that gold plate that it's talked about. It's called this, almost sounds like tzitzits, and the holy crown that the Lord had commanded. And these were for the high priest. Verse 10, and Moses took the anointing oil and the anointing tabernacle and all that was in it and consecrated him. He sprinkled on it on the altar 7 times, anointed the altar and the utensils and the laver and the base to consecrate them. And he poured some of the anointing oil on Aaron's head and anointed him to consecrate it. So this process of anointing someone is to Mashiach them. Aaron is now a Mashiach, right? He's anointed. Jesus, when he comes out of the wilderness, he goes, the Spirit is upon me, and God has anointed me. He has made me Mashiach, right? Verse 13, then Moses brought Aaron's sons and put tunics on them and girded them with sashes and put on hats on them and commanded Moses, that he had commanded Moses. Verse 14, and he brought the bull of the sin offering, and Aaron and his sons laid hands on the head of the bull for the sin offering, and Moses killed it. And then he took the bread. So he's getting these guys prepared to be consecrated. He's dressing them up in the bling-bling outfit of the high priest. He's getting their burnt offering and their sin sacrifice. He's getting ready to set them apart. Because the next Torah portion will talk about them being set apart and the grand opening day of the tabernacle when fire comes down from heaven. Verse 15, and Moses killed it and then took the blood and put some on the horns of the altar and all around with the finger and purified the altar. So he's purifying the altar, atoning the altar. And he poured the blood on the base of the altar and consecrated to make atonement for it. Then he took all the fat that was on the entrails and the fatty lobe and attached to the liver and the 2 kidneys with their fat, and then Moses burned them on the altar. But the bull and its hide and its flesh and its offal, he burned with fire outside the camp as the Lord had commanded. All these details, these are God's choices. And then he brought the ram and the burnt offering, and Aaron and his sons, and laid hands on him in the head. And Moses killed it, and he sprinkled the blood around the altar And he cut the ram into pieces, and Moses burned the head and the pieces of the fat, and then he washed the entrails and the legs of water, and so they had to wash them in the water. And Moses burned the whole ram into the altar, and the burnt offering, the sacrifice for a sweet aroma, an offering made by fire to the Lord, as the Lord had commanded. So sometimes you see they're throwing these things up on the thing, it's burning the flesh, consuming the animal, and God says that's a sweet aroma. Could be because it's the flesh, like Paul says, it's this flesh that's given me grief. It's this flesh that makes me sin. And I got it from Adam. And so maybe this burning of flesh represents this one day when we'll discard this flesh, right? Put on this flesh that Jesus has that walks through waters, but yet still can enjoy a good Cabernet, right? Verse 20, and he cut the ram into pieces, and the Moses and the head and the pieces of the fat. And this is a sweet aroma. Verse 22, and he brought the second ram and the ram of consecration. Then Aaron and his sons laid the hands on the head of the head, and Moses killed it. And he took some of the blood and put it on the tip of Aaron's right ear and on his right thumb and on his big toe on his right foot. And then he brought Aaron's, this is crazy, right? And Moses put some of the blood on the tips of the right ear and the thumbs and the right hands and the big toes and the right feet, and Moses sprinkled the blood of the thing. Crazy. Only because we don't really understand the true value and the true meaning that we, and we'll never will if we avoid this. So, we're brought to the task of bringing these Torah portions. Some of them, are great. The splitting of the Red Sea, that's fun, and we've got all that stuff. But then we got to deal in the fatty liver and the kidney, but who wrote this? Who's the author? Not me. Then he took the fat and the fat of the tail, and on the entrails and the fatty lobe, attached the liver and the two kidneys and the right, and from the basket of the unleavened bread. And then it just continues to go on here. The offering made by fire, and Moses took the bread and the basket and waved it. So this is the wave offering for Aaron and his sons. And then verse 30, Moses took some of the anointing oil and put on the blood which was on the altar and sprinkled it with Aaron, and on the garments on the son and the garments of the son, and consecrated Aaron and the garments of his son and the garments of his son with him. So he's preparing these guys to be set apart for 7 days as priests. And then on the 8th day, and we have a Torah portion for that. It's the day that's the grand opening. God's fire comes down from heaven, lights the altar that's never to be put out, right? The eternal fire. So, in Matthew 1, it says, and she will bring forth a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he shall save his people from their sins, right? So again, we've got this atonement language, but Jesus is going to save his people from their sins, right? It doesn't really sound like substitutionary atonement. Or it would say Jesus is going to pay the price for their sins, but it doesn't say that, right? John the Baptist says the next day John saw Jesus coming toward him and said, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, right? He doesn't say who pays the penalty for the sin of the world, who takes away the sin of the world. So this whole process of purification day that takes away the sin that purifies us is much bigger than that, right? Because he wants to atone for us, and he will. We ask for his forgiveness, and he's just to forgive. But God's future picture is to completely decontaminate us. And I'm saying through the resurrection, we now can live, like he says in Ezekiel 37, I'll put a flesh of heart, take away your stony heart, and you will, and cause you to walk in my ways, and you will accomplish it. That Paul connects to the resurrection. Paul connects that to the new covenant, this resurrection. And then we see here in Daniel 9:24 that the 70 weeks are decreed for your people, your holy city, to finish transgression, pesha, to put an end to sin, hatya, and to atone for avon, iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, right? All these three things are going to be handled. And they're described in Isaiah 53 of how they'll be handled. And there was no way for us to handle them on our own. We could not do it. Let's run through Isaiah 53. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet he was esteemed him not. Smitten by God, afflicted. This word afflicted is lepra. He was turned into a leper almost. He was contaminated, defiled, right? And so in the Sanhedrin and Talmud, it says that they have a thing that's called the leper Messiah. And the Talmud describes a leper Messiah in the story about how the Messiah they would find him caring for lepers because of this verse right here in Isaiah 53. You know, they connect him to being defiled. But yet he touches someone that's defiled and makes him clean. And then it goes on to say, and he was pierced for our transgressions, pesha. These were intentional sins. And he was crushed for our iniquities, avon. Upon them the chastisement that brought us peace. And with his wounds we are healed. Atonement, Lord, will you cleanse me? Right? It doesn't say forgive me. He says cleanse me, and he says, and I will, and he was healed. So atonement can mean healed. And as like sheep have gone away, and we've turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord has laid upon him the iniquity of us all. He was posed and was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb, he was led to the slaughter. This is Passover language, right? And like a sheep that wears before his shears was silent, so he opened not his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away, and as for his generation who considered that he was cut off from the land of the living, stricken by transgression of my people, and that they may have grave with the wicked and the rich man in the death, although he had done no violence. Like Daniel 9, and he was cut off, but not for himself. And then there was no deceit in his mouth. So you can see there's Passover language right in here in 53 that connects us to this atonement that the Lamb brings. Verse 10, and yet it was still the will of the Lord to crush him and put him into grief, and where his soul makes an offering for guilt. There's that word trespass, a sham, one of the sacrifices. And he shall see the offspring, and he shall see his offspring, and he shall prolong his days, and the will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. Out of the anguish of the soul he shall see and be satisfied by knowledge, shall righteous be my servant. And many to be accounted, and make many to be accounted righteous. This is the suffering servant that acts as a Passover lamb that atones for sin, that heals it, gets away all those three sins that we talked about: sin, transgression, avon, iniquity, intentional sin. And therefore I will divide him with a portion with the many, and he will divide the spoil of the strong, because he poured out his soul to death, and he was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he bore the sin of many. That word bore is nasa, which means to lift up or take away. the sin, right? That yet he will take away the sin of many. Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. And he makes intercession for the transgressors. That's what a priest does. And yet, let's see. And that's Isaiah 53. So we can see that all this sin, all this sacrifice stuff, that giving us all the gory details and everything is accomplished here in Isaiah 53 and prophesied in Daniel 9 as how this will all be attained for, right? And so all of this is really is a bigger picture of what we're trying to do, what God's trying to do here. And he wants to show us how this all is accomplished. And that how he's the one that has to do it. We can't do it on ourselves. And yet he's going to do it. And so I had a really good closing, and I forgot it. So, oh, it was really good. You loved it. No, I've been practicing all week, running through my head, right? And I get here and I go, yeah. Anyways, so we could see that God has a bigger plan, and atonement is bigger than we thought, and sin sacrifices is bigger than I thought, and all this is for purification, and God's bigger than our minds can understand, and we have to take that and pull from this what God really wants to do and how we should appreciate all that he's done for us, right? I say that and I say God bless. Thanks.